What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about Jason Schreier's article on Redfall, and I believe it's kind of like the making of Redfall, also the downfall, right? Why the things that happen, why did they happen? That's what Schreier has talked about. Now, there's quite a bit to get into. There's, of course, controversy because this is a article obviously targeting a Xbox exclusive. So you have things on Twitter, of course, the console warriors are at it again. Maybe to just address that extremely quick, I think that's an incredibly stupid argument or an incredibly stupid thing to even bring up. Look, does Schreier have his biases and slants? 100%. We talked about it actually with the Star Wars things and things he does in the past. He definitely writes with a bias. He definitely goes for clicks. That's absolutely true. But I find this just more interesting in what actually happened, hopefully, as long as you believe the guy, which, again, he's been kind of known to exaggerate some things, so maybe don't believe him fully 100%, but I don't think he's doing this as an Xbox attack. I would just hope that whoever wants to learn from the situation, in this case being Xbox, they should learn from it. If it was a Sony thing, if it was a Nintendo thing, it would all be the same. Doesn't matter, console warriors or whatever, matters what the situation actually was, whose fault is this, and then how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And that's really what the article goes into. So a couple key things I want to talk about. Now, the article is paywalled. You have to pay for it. People have been posting it all over the place, so you don't have to pay for it. If you want to find it, probably just type it into Twitter. You can find people that took screenshots of it. So beyond that, beyond the initial gateway to getting into this thing, couple things to make note of. Number one, the whole 70% thing. So this is something I saw on Twitter quite often of the amount of people that worked on Prey, right? So this was the team that worked on Prey as their game right before Redfall. And from Prey to the release of Redfall, 70% of the team had left. And the article goes into they struggled to get replacements, and getting people to move to Texas was a challenge, and just getting people, I guess, in general was a challenge. Also because they couldn't say the kind of game that it was. So people kind of wanted to make a single player game, and it was a more multiplayer slanted game. So they had trouble filling in voids, and they also just had trouble because they lost 70% of a team. And a team that also, by the way, and we've said this kind of before, they're specialized. They're specialized at a thing. The leaders of Arcane were specialized at a thing, and then they had to be shifted mainly because ZeniMax made them. Now, the article goes into this as well, that obviously they were the owners, right? So they were the ones giving the directives saying, hey, what we kind of want you to do is make a live service game. They say it wasn't a requirement, but pretty much any game that released under them from that point that they said that on, every game had at least a multiplayer component to it. So the idea that, say, Redfall would come out, be a single player only game, no multiplayer elements, no live service, no nothing, that seems absolutely impossible. At best, it would maybe have a multiplayer thing with it as a separate entity, right? But obviously they went kind of all in and they just pitched a full-on multiplayer game. They talk about kind of a lack of direction. Basically, the leaders just weren't very good either. Probably, again, this all probably stems from the idea that when these executives come down and say, look, we're kind of wanting to sell off. We want to sell ourselves. We don't really have a lot of money. We want long-term profitability. We don't necessarily get that, even if the game's good, which I still don't really believe. I say this. If a game is incredibly good and you can sell it on day one and it's a single player game, you should make all your money back then. Yes, you may want money in year 2 and year 3, and yeah, that may kind of dry up. But in reality, if you're going to sell a game and say it sells 5, 6, 7 million units in the first month or two, that's where you make all your, that should be enough money to make it all back. If that's not enough money to make it all back, then you need to go look at your budgets and, things like that. I don't know why these people don't understand this stuff. But no, I mean, their honest answer is because they want that. But then they also want that kind of money rolling in every month. And how do you get that? Cosmetics, live service. They talk about that Overwatch and Fortnite, right? That they were chasing trends. I've said it before, live service, really Fortnite to a big extent, it's destroyed a large portion of gaming because you have these executives that do these trend chasing practices that just don't result in things going well. And then I guess when you have Xbox stepping in, the big part of the story with Xbox was they come in and they buy it, and so it's like, okay, well, what are they going to do with Redfall? And some people in the company were literally hoping that that Xbox would come in and shut it down and say restart either as a single player game or just make something else. They were hoping that, and instead Microsoft or Xbox went in and said, we'll cancel the PlayStation version, but we're going to be hands off after that. And this was an example they actually would have liked Xbox to step in and dictate. And again, none of this is all that shocking or surprising. We kind of had, you could read into it, you could assume, you could gather from rumors back with like when Phil Spencer went on Kind of Funny like that, several weeks ago. That's kind of how that all felt, where Xbox was so hands off, and in a way that's very good, but in a situation like this, you gotta actually like have your eyes on it. Now, it's tough because so much of the gaming industry is a secret, right? So much is not said. I wanted to bring in a Sony argument, right? And not as a stupid console wars thing, but you actually see both sides of it. So like Redfall, obviously Xbox didn't really care or stayed so far away from it, right, that it turned out to be what it did. On the other hand, I mean, we just got like 2 weeks in a row of all these really bad Sony rumors, studios shut down, games being canceled, and, the games being canceled, even if it was a third-party game, well, it still had funding or had backing from PlayStation, so PlayStation had to have said or done something, right? They've had a rough several weeks, PlayStation as well. And I guess, is that the other side of it? We know Sony is hands-off. They've said the same thing. Sony doesn't like to dictate. But at the same time, is that true? What is true? Because, again, everybody lies. Nobody really tells the truth. Nobody's very transparent in the gaming industry. Sony, did they look at these things and say, yeah, absolutely not? Or the Last of Us rumor. You had Bungie look over your game, and if Bungie deemed it to not be good, then that means the game is in trouble? Like, why did that happen? Like, that's an odd situation. Maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't, but I mean, that seems to be that situation. So you have two kind of tales of opposite things going on here, and look at what we get because of it, right? But I'd say those were kind of the main, hits of this article for Redfall. It sucks, but like the biggest, I take away a couple things. Number one, I take away a very depressing idea that people have said on Twitter that if you think about it, and this is the same thing for like movies and other things, it's not, exclusively towards games. Think of like your favorite game of all time, or think of like your top 5 or top 10. The odds of that studio as it was still being around are next to zero. Because the fact is, and people have done stats of like BioWare, the team that's made, or the team that did make, say, the original Mass Effect trilogy, about 70% of them also have left. 40-50% of people that worked on Witcher 3, they have left. There's all these stats, and I guess if you really wanted to look, you probably could with like LinkedIn and the ending credits of like games. You could try to mix and match like who's there, who's not there. But it is just a real thing where you know how many people are contract workers. You know how many people leave a position to just take like the same position in a different company or maybe like one step up. But it is actually tragic when you think about your favorite games and just whenever, it doesn't even matter. It could have been 2-3 years ago, your favorite game could be 10 years ago. And the odds that that team, even if it's the studio name, right? Like Uncharted for me is such an important franchise. Sly Cooper. Do I believe that 100% of the people that made Sly 2 and 3 are still at Sucker Punch? No, it's probably like 20%. It's probably an incredibly low number, right? Some of the heads actually still are there, but some of the other people aren't. So like you have to know that, and it is actually very depressing. Now it happens in Hollywood, things like that happen, but you have like the directors and the producers there maybe still attached, but a lot of like the ground level, and in games it's so important, right? These ground level people that really made the game, not just the writer and the director and all this stuff, the gameplay designers, all that, but smaller roles, they're very important, and a lot of them have been swapped out. So when we brought up the argument, I brought it up too, like, I had just replayed Dishonored 1, love it, I'm going to eventually play 2, but I love Prey. I've loved Prey for a long time. And when you think that, okay, this studio, this is why, like, making comparisons is hard in the gaming industry. You say the team that made Prey made Redfall, is that even possible? Like, how did that happen? Well, number one, it is kind of possible because bad communication. The leaders didn't really know what they were doing. Again, all based on Schreier's article. So maybe it's not real, maybe it is real. But what he said, they weren't able to direct. You had the entire premise really, okay, not the vampire online thing, but you had the direction the game needed to go in. Live service, multiplayer as the focus. That didn't come from anybody on the team. That came from the executives that owned them. And so immediately you've lost. And I think that's probably true for most games. And it could be true for a lot of things we're going to see in the industry over the next several years. The good news is now Microsoft, right? Xbox. So, Phil Spencer, he admits all this stuff. He apologized. The biggest things, of course, I think want them to take away from it is I would hope that initiative to make a live service game, that can never be said, okay? Like immediately, that can never be directed, whether it's PlayStation, which kind of scares me because PlayStation does seem like that's what's happening. You never want the first meeting to say, well, we'll let you do your own thing, but like it definitely has to be under the umbrella of live service. You gotta make that. Immediately, you already have kind of taken away some of that independence, let's say, from the studio. So you can't do that. And then Microsoft's big failure that they made, or Xbox, they're compatible, or you can say either, is you got to be a little hands-on, right? I honestly feel pretty good with the first part. I don't think Xbox starts with make a live service game, at least I don't think. But the second part is that change that Phil Spencer, has had to answer questions, had to, respond to and all that stuff. They do need to be more hands-on because you can catch these things. They caught this like 2-3 years, or I think 2021. They caught it. They caught the situation. They just didn't do anything about it. So yeah, they didn't start it, and that's not their problem, and it doesn't seem like they even do that in the first place. So good. But then if something like this were to happen, or just things aren't clicking, you got to be able to like look at it and make a decision. And that's where they've struggled, and that's obviously where they need to improve. So fascinating stuff. Again, if you believe it, I'm definitely always up for taking some shots at Schreier. I don't think he's the greatest guy, and I also, again, he has slants, and he's been known to exaggerate some stuff, but ultimately, I feel like this is real. A lot of this stuff I think was hinted weeks ago. Kind of makes sense to me, at least. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.